Hello, welcome to the 100th episode of the Worthy Mother podcast, which is like kind of unbelievable saying that, although I've been really excited to do this episode. So it has been 100 episodes. I'm just really excited that I've gotten to spend the last 100 episodes with you. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're mixing it up quite a bit. So typically we either have the solo episodes where I'm just kind of chatting and, sharing my thoughts, talking about different concepts, or we have the guest episodes where I am interviewing guests and we're having those kind of conversations. And today I am going to be interviewed. Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. So I have my good friend, Breanne Smith. She is the host of the Root and Rise podcast. She is a past guest of the Worthy Mother podcast, and she is joining us here to interview me. And we're going to have, I think, a really fun conversation. So Bree, welcome. And I'll kind of pass the mic over to you.
I am so excited to be here and I'm honored to be able to interview you. I think it's rare that you are highlighted, and I think it's important that you are highlighted, especially for your listeners, your community as you're building it. I just have so many thoughts that I want to say because I do think it's really important that they get to know you, and you spend so much time highlighting other people. I'm just excited to get a chance to highlight you.
Oh, I'm so
Celebrate you.
excited.
100. That's incredible.
Celebrate
I'm not
100.
there. That's
Well,
incredible.
I'm all about us celebrating our accomplishments, big and small. And I try and stay true to that in life. But this is a pretty big one. So let's do something a little different.
What a beautiful thing to model celebrating yourself. And I'm excited to be celebrating you. A lot of the topics that you highlight on your podcast, this podcast, you talk a lot about mental health and caring for yourself and self-compassion. And I wanted to take some time to talk about your experience. So, one of the main topics that you cover pretty much in every episode is self-compassion. And I would love to hear how you find self-compassion for yourself, just like day-to-day life.
This is something I've been kind of reflecting on a lot recently because in finding this space of motherhood support and really getting into it, being like, this is something I want to dedicate a lot of the work that I do to, I've really done a lot of learning about the societal influences on us and the messages that we get. And, I talk about that so much here on the podcast, but it's really interesting to reflect on how learning how these messages kind of infiltrate our beings and how we tend to make everything so personal when really there's a lot of systematic things in place that cause motherhood to feel a certain way for us if we're not aware of those systematic pieces. And for me, one of the biggest pieces to developing that self-compassion has been in understanding things from a more academic perspective, from really understanding okay, there are actual sociological factors at play here that really have very little to do with me. And even in a moment of feeling like I can't handle being around my kid at a moment, or just any number of things, any small moments where I might feel guilt come in, because I do. I feel the guilt and I feel the shame. But being able to understand that usually there's a lot behind that, a lot of expectations, a lot of pressure, a lot of mental labor and physical labor, and just all the things that have come before that. It's really given me just a way to shift my mindset, I guess, to a more compassionate place, knowing, okay, yeah, maybe that's something I want to work on, but also I can kind of justify it a little bit differently, and it just feels different.
When you started your motherhood journey, where did you find that you were struggling the most with self-compassion? What were some of the areas you were feeling guilt in the most?
Okay, so for me, I became a mom at 23. It was unexpected, and I'd always imagined becoming a mom, but it was different than I imagined. And I think in a lot of ways that shaped my entry into motherhood in a good way because things were already different than I expected, and I needed a lot of help. I was going to school, I was asking for help from family, a lot of family, because I very clearly needed it. And so, my partner and I had a lot of support, and it was great. And so there were a lot of things that like I didn't necessarily feel intense guilt about that I think I otherwise would have. But something that has been really notable for me is like the guilt I feel around things that I associate with, quote, being a mom, these mom tasks that I know have nothing to do with raising my kids, but like being organized, having the house together, being able to like handle different things. I never was great at that before, and it's still not great at it. And it's been a lot trying to like navigate those complex feelings of guilt. Like I'm not doing a good enough job being a mom when really that's not what it means to be a mom. Another thing I would say is that with my oldest son, he's 5 now, he's almost 6. This is something that I've been navigating since he was really little, was like feeling intense anger at his like reactions to things. And it was from the time he was like little, like, before he was a year old, I remember having feelings. And it's been really interesting navigating like our personalities together and just the pressures that come along with having a kid that you do kind of butt heads with. And I've seen with my second son, like there definitely are personality things at play. And I don't think we really talk about that a lot. We don't talk about the fact that like all our kids are different and we're going to have different relationships with them. And I'm like super close with my oldest son. He's like the most loving little being, but there's just things that I never expected to have to navigate that like there's been a lot of guilt and shame around some of that. And so I would say those two things stand out to me. But of course, there's plenty of things.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think societal expectations and trying to be that perfect mom image. I love that you point out that cleaning the house and these added tasks outside of actual parenting or being with your kid don't hold any value on you as a mother. I was just texting with a friend today about that. She's a new mother and she's just starting to learn those things.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to talk about that because she said she had no idea. And that is why it is important to have these conversations. And what I hear too is that you are gaining so much self awareness and you have. And I'm curious what you've learned about yourself along the way and what your kids might have taught you. Because I know a lot of learning about your kids can bring up a lot of learning in yourself.
Yeah, I think something that, like, the biggest thing that I've learned in the last, 6 years of being a mom, and also in like doing this work and understanding motherhood in a sociological context and just like existing as a woman in society, is that I really had this super strong image of myself as a kid who was like this good kid. And I have an episode coming out in a couple weeks on good girl conditioning. And just like, I don't think I realized how much the messages that I received, not necessarily just like getting the messages, but I really internalized a lot about like, I'm this good kid. And so I felt a lot of shame growing up when I wouldn't live up to like, something in school didn't come easy to me or like whatever it was. There was just a lot of shame pretty much through all of my life. And having conversations with other moms in a really like supported space, right? Like with this podcast and just like going through the experience of having kids and being like, wow, I had a kid when I was not married at 23. And like that doesn't fall in line with this like image of a good girl and like what I thought I would turn into like this perfect adult, even though I knew that I've always known that I couldn't live up to the standard of perfection that I thought I had to. But just really being able to look at my relationship with perfection and with being good and having kids who, are not these easy toddlers like I was when I was a toddler, right? Like they're not the way that I was as a little kid. And my kindergartner, he didn't have the easiest start to the year academically. He was, having a hard time, and we're at the end of the school year now and he's really gotten in the flow of things, but it's like coming from a place where like I had been a classroom teacher, an elementary school teacher. I taught kindergarten for a year. I know that like not all kids just find it easy. And so it wasn't like I was like shocked that he was having a hard time. It's like, yeah, that happens and it's okay. I don't want to place all the value in how you do on school, but just kind of knowing that like that gave me the opportunity to look at my own experience too and like how I believed I existed in this world based on just being a good kid. It's very interesting to like reflect on it all. And there's still like so much more to unpack, but that's definitely like the biggest window that's been opened for me.
It's like a new awareness that has
Yeah.
stirred your brain chemistry.
Yes. And will continue to. Like it's constant.
And I love how your experience with teaching played into that and gaining that awareness. I also am curious to hear more about your experience leaving teaching.
Yeah, I would love to share about that because it's something that I don't know that I talk about much. And it's also like a quite an important part of my story and my journey, including motherhood, because I was about to start my teaching credential program when I found out I was pregnant. And so I went 2 quarters, took summer off, and then a quarter off to have my baby, and then came back and student taught and obviously was like in it. I'm like, I'm gonna go be a teacher. And I did. And I loved students. I loved teaching. I loved like getting to play a part in their development. I've always loved working with kids. But I also like I didn't know when I was in college. I had entered college with a major in architectural engineering, switched pretty quickly to communication studies. By the time I graduated college, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it was really after like getting a job in an elementary school that I went back like, okay, teaching's a stable career and I can make money and, have a good retirement and cool, like all good. So it wasn't some like lifelong dream, right? It was pretty much like after college, I was like, okay, I can do that. So I like really committed to that path. I was teaching during the pandemic. I got pregnant with my second son, in my second year of teaching, and he was born. And I also got my master's at that time. So like I was like doing school, having babies, and like I was like, I love this. I love school. I love learning. I love like doing these things. So it was like my comfort zone, right? And I really, during the pandemic and, just dealing with different things in the school system and realizing like how much I didn't feel supported in my role as a teacher, it really like shook me. And it was hard to go in front of my students every day and tell them that they could do whatever they wanted with their lives and know that I felt like I was kind of being exploited in a sense, like not being paid enough, working extra hours. There's this whole culture with teaching about like paying for your own supplies and things like that. And it's very much just like perpetuated in schools. And it was really not in alignment with like my values as a person. So like I feel like public school is a really important thing. That's really important to me to like know the roles that public schools play in our country and like how important it is. Like my kids go to public school. I have a lot of thoughts there, but I also had a really hard time like being part of the system. And I left. And when I left, there were people who were like, well, I do it for the kids. And I was like, I can't do it for the kids. It feels like there's such a cognitive dissonance there. And then there were a lot of people who were like, I'm sad you're giving up on this dream. And really, I was like, this wasn't a dream. I kind of led myself to believe that it was, but in reality, I just had never let myself dream. And I kind of felt like it was time for me to like give myself the space to do that. And I think having kids and knowing that like I want them to make decisions that are right for them and to like be able to see different possibilities for themselves, really like knowing that I wanted that for my kids and for my students gave me kind of the insight to be able to like do that for myself.
It's really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful and inspiring.
It's not one of those things where I'm like, oh, everyone should just quit their job just because, whatever. But it's like, I do think that we fall into patterns of feeling like we've made a choice. That's the choice we get to stick with. Or like we made a choice and it was good then. So like I should do because I committed to it, or it's probably still the right choice. And I think sometimes if we look a little deeper, there's a lot more possibility for us. Like who knows? Who knows what the future holds for any of us in terms of the work we do? But there's possibility.
There is, and I love that you turned an ending into a beginning and you were able to close a chapter of your life and look at it as an opportunity. And where did you go? I know that becoming a mother, you can lose your identity and it's easy to lose yourself in motherhood. It sounds like you were kind of finding yourself, and I have no doubt.
Hmm.
So we're losing part of yourself. I'm just curious how you navigated that during such a large transition, both with your career and your personal life, with marriage and a baby, and then another
Yeah.
baby.
I mean, I'll say, I think in the beginning, like I didn't navigate it. Like I feel like I just kind of fell into patterns with my first because we had moved back home from my husband was in the military and we were living a few hours away from home and we had moved back home together. And so we were like finding our place in our hometown where a lot of our friends weren't anymore and figuring that out, like figuring out our identities and how it fit into that picture. And then, yeah, like starting my career and then having a baby. I do feel like I was in such a place of like, I don't even know who I am as an individual because I'm in my early 20s and like have not gotten to a point where I figured that out right. And then, yeah, having a baby. I mean, those first few months, you like don't really have an option. You're kind of in survival mode in a lot of ways. And I think that's something that like is okay to just kind of accept because it's hard. And we saw a lot of family and, got through it and it was great. But like, I just kind of didn't really know how to navigate my own identity. And I think really for me, what allowed me to kind of dig deeper and understand who I was really after my second son was born. I, first of all, started dealing with my mental health in a more concrete way than I ever had before, which allowed for a lot more introspection and space to like get to know myself and my needs and who I am. And then also just finding something that I was passionate about. Really, like motherhood has been that for me. Not motherhood like in mothering my children, but motherhood, like understanding motherhood in this context. It's been really like life-giving and allowed me to just like pour into something that I really care about and to learn. I love learning. Like I said, like I thrive when I'm getting to like learn in a structured way. And yeah, I would say like that's how it was really kind of the two parts of dealing with my mental health and the opportunities that that gave me. And then also finding something that I was passionate about.
And I see it all coming together full circle. Like you're back here teaching. And
Yeah.
for say, how can you give up on the kids? You're helping the mothers, which in turns helps the kids. Like I just see it all coming full circle. And I think that every step along your journey can be another beautiful piece to something bigger. And I'm excited that you are here at your 100th episode. And I'm excited to see where you end up going. Talking about your mental health and learning more about that, I know a big piece of your identity and struggling with who you are can be a diagnosis. And I'm curious, I don't know if you share your diagnoses, or if you're willing to just talk about the experience of not letting that become you, but allowing that to teach you more about yourself.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I will just say that I was like always an anxious kid, like the kid with stomach aches that didn't want to go to school and like people calling me a worry wart, which I did not like. But just like very cautious and not just cautious, but like I really would internalize the anxiety of like everything's scary, life's scary, we're all alone. Like I don't even know. Like I had these kind of doomy
Ex-
feelings pretty young.
Existential dread.
Like for real, like that was something that was like a part of my life forever until like I mean not even until it was part of my life forever and then it never was bad enough to where I really had to deal with it. I mean there were times where it's like I definitely in college should have had a therapist, should have like done something more than just like white knuckle it through. But it never was like at a point where like I couldn't function in life. I was fine. So it's just like, I'm fine, whatever, which, I think so many of us feel like that. We feel like, well, I'm fine and I can function. So like, cool. Like, I don't know. And it really, like, after having my first son, again, like, I had feelings of like mom rage, which is like now something I know, but it was like based in a lot of anxiety and, not feeling good about life. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. But again, I never really dealt with it because it just didn't feel bad enough to deal with. I wasn't having postpartum depression. I wasn't having postpartum anxiety. It didn't seem like that, right? And after my second son was born, I was having feelings of existential dread constantly, like to the point where I would be sitting on the couch thinking about like the most purpose driven or like important person, right? I'd think about like my doctors, like, oh, they have an important role and they like went to school for a long time and are doing important things like delivering babies. And I'd be like, what's the point? Like, I literally couldn't get to the point of it all. I just had these feelings of doom and like dread of like I don't know. And it was weird because it wasn't like when you read about depression and postpartum depression and I've had depression, I think more of as a symptom of anxiety, but it just I wouldn't classify it as like being depression. It was I was anxious and it made me very depressed. But it was like so bad that I was like I have to deal with this. Like I have to. And so I met with my doctor and was able to like get a therapist and that was really awesome. Insurance paid for therapy and it was like, okay, cool. Like I can do this. And I got on medication that, like, thank goodness I did because I also was having a lot of intrusive thoughts. And I've talked about that on the podcast some. I won't get into it, but it's just like these thoughts that I was like, I can't stop fixating on something. And I know now that like anxiety can kind of come up in that way of like I think of something and I fixate and like can't stop thinking it. And if I wanted to right now, like I'm sure I could do it. I could just choose something like horrible to think about and not stop thinking about it. It
Just
was
spiral.
pretty bad. Yeah, like totally spiraling. And, since working on the anxiety and since like being on medication, which I've been, on and off for the past, I guess, like 3 years, and it really does help me like exist in the world in a way that like I can actually like function because when you're having those kinds of thoughts and you can't turn it off, it's like pretty intrusive. It's pretty intrusive. Like it impacts your life and it doesn't feel good. And so that was a big part of my journey with anxiety. And I've gotten to a place now where like I can handle things a little bit better. I also recently was diagnosed with ADHD, which was a diagnosis that I have been like seeking, I guess, for a while. It's something that I realized that like, whoa, a lot of the things that are challenging for me, I guess you could say, or just like the tendencies I have, like my mind not turning off. And, I always was awake as a little kid and like couldn't turn my brain off, just a lot of these things. And then my like difficulties with managing daily life and tasks and executive functioning. It's been really clear to me for a while that like I really was not typical in those senses, if that makes sense. And so that I recently was diagnosed with ADHD and exploring how to navigate that has been really interesting. And something that I do want to talk more about because I think these are conversations that are important and like sharing the way that we navigate these things is important. There's not like one way to navigate it, but it can be really life-changing when you allow yourself to do the things you need to do to like live a better life and live more in like yourself, right? I
Mhm.
think that's something that for me, I'm finally at a point where like I feel like I can exist as me, which is pretty big.
Yeah, it's big and beautiful because you should be existing in the world as you are. You are a beautiful, kind, intelligent, brave, and compassionate person.
You're so sweet.
I'm happy that you brought up meds. And
Yeah.
no, quick medication check for anybody listening. If you haven't taken your medications today, you need to. And I am happy to be talking about this with you. It needs to be normalized. I think that more people are probably taking medication for their mental health than you realize. I take it, you take it. So,
Mhm.
anybody who has any doubts, I just want to help normalize it and remind you to take it today. So,
Yeah, because I mean, if you're anything like me, you need the reminder. Yeah, I will say that something that's been really valuable with our friendship is being able to have those conversations like really candidly with no judgment, because I think there is a lot of stigma around medication. And I do think there are issues in our healthcare system where people are sometimes over medicated. Like, I'm not saying that like everyone should be on medication, but I do think that like there's a lot of factors to mental health, a lot of factors that are out of our control. And I'm all about like if you can find something that works for you, whatever that is, that again allows you to live more as yourself without all the other like crap just piled on. Because if you're dealing with severe depression, if you're dealing with like really intrusive anxiety, if you're dealing with the inability to like live your life and function, I mean, if you can find something that helps that, like, yes, like
why-
it's okay.
everybody wants a magic pill. Like, maybe there is one. Maybe you should take
Yeah.
it. Not everybody.
I do think, especially when we're having conversations about mindset, and that's something that I really like to talk about is how we can kind of shift our mindset around different things, particularly when it comes to having more self-compassion and understanding our experiences in a less individualized way. We can understand where we fit into it all. I think it's really important to understand, though, like mental health, there are things that we can do when it comes to mindset to like set ourselves up for better mental health and, to work on our mental wellness and, make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and our mental health. However, it's so important to know that like you can't just mindset your way out of depression. You can't just mindset your way out of these patterns of existing and feeling and being that sometimes have like a lot of different factors to them, including like hormones and brain chemistry and like traumas and all kinds of things that, like, yes, you can work on mindset surrounding different things, and it very well may help. It very likely will help, right? Like when you can get into a good headspace and know how to take care of yourself and understand the context and all these things. But like, it's so important for us just to recognize that mental health diagnoses are complex, and just changing your mindset or changing the way you eat or like whatever it is, it's not always going to fix the underlying problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I see a lot of like messaging that kind of, tells us like, if you just do this, or if you just do this, and it's like maybe for someone, but we're complex human beings. Like there's a lot of factors. So I think that's just something too, that when we have these conversations, it's important to be honest about the complexities as individuals, because you want to make sure that you're doing what you can to support your mental health. And if it's just making these changes that you think you're allowed to or supposed to make, it might not be enough to like really help support you.
Changing your mindset can help improve the situation, but it can't fix the
Yeah.
situation. Not having a, one size fits all. I think it's important to have these conversations because marketing wants you to believe that there's a one pill, one solution, one exercise, one program.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not talking amongst ourselves about all of the different small changes that are impacting our lives, and that it may not fix everything, but it can help add a little bit more improvement. And every step that you take and everything that you try can hopefully help a little bit more. What other things outside of medications have you used to support yourself or have been supporting you?
Yeah, I think the biggest place my mind goes is to have conversations. And so for a while, that was in therapy. I'm not currently in therapy, but it's something that I've, again, done on and off. And like when I really need it, I'm there. But even having conversations with friends and family and like on this podcast and getting to a place where I feel comfortable sharing my experience, again, like there's a lot that's gone into that, into like being able to share my experience. A lot of it was like hearing other people share their experiences and realizing like, oh, if we talk about this, then it doesn't feel so shameful. But I think that's a lot of it. I think for me, like shame is really integrated with the mental health, and being able to talk about things can either like release the shame. We stop that spiral of like, I'm horrible, there's something completely wrong with me, whatever the thought is. When we say it out loud and someone's like, oh, that happens to me too, or like whatever it is, and it's like, oh, and it's huge. Like it can be huge, with intrusive thoughts, hearing that other people have intrusive thoughts. And you're like, oh, I'm not, losing it, or like there's not something necessarily horribly wrong with me. It's like, okay, I can admit this and like tell my doctor about it. So that's been huge. And then just like the fact that like talking to people gives you language, it gives you experiences to play off of and allows you to ask for help in a way, again, like with less shame behind it, because you feel like, okay, I can ask for help, but also like just literally gives you the language to like understand your experiences and be able to type something into Google.
Mhm.
Like it's pretty incredible just the impact that that has. And so I would say like that's the biggest thing for me that's changed my mental health, is being able to have those conversations, being able to like admit when I'm not doing great, and being able to like hold space for others to do the same, and to like to be honest, because it really does make a difference for all parties.
It really does. And having the conversations in general is really important. And I think it's really honorable that you record them and you take the time to edit them and put them up online so other people can hear these conversations, learn this language, and maybe have a mindset shift. Talking about some of your episodes and all of your episodes that you've put out, I'm curious if you have any favorite episodes.
Yeah, okay. I would say that like it would be really hard to pick like actual favorite episodes, but I will say that, well, first of all, like when you were a guest on my podcast, we connected and became friends. So like obviously that one is pretty high up there. But also like there's just been some conversations where something clicks differently for me. I can't even point to individual episodes, but I know a lot of the conversations I've had on this podcast have really like enlightened me. I was talking about like my relationship with being a good kid to like an adult who I'm like, wait, I'm supposed to be good. I'm supposed to be like perfect. Right. And having conversations with women who say very similar things. They say it very differently than I do, but I'm like, oh, you experienced that too. And like for a little bit, that was a very odd thing of like, wait, I'm not the only one. But then it was like, oh, this happens to most of us. Like, this is what we're talking about when we talk about the perfect mother myth and things like that. And so there's definitely been a lot of conversations that have kind of drawn me in that direction. Some of my most recent episodes that have come out in the last couple weeks have been people that I have sought out and invited onto the podcast in a very like explicit way because I really wanted to talk to them about their experiences and like how they've navigated different relationships and things like that. And so that's been really exciting getting to just expand who I'm having conversations with and have these really important conversations that I'm like really wanting to have. So yeah, that would be my answer. I'm really proud of the episodes I've put out, and I think that this podcast is pretty great. And so it's hard to narrow it down. I have some good ones coming too. Like, there's some really awesome episodes that are lined up and already recorded that are like phenomenal. So yeah.
And I think it would be hard to pick too because they're all connected. They all
Hmm.
intertwine and weave together in this big overall message and overarching, purpose and
Yeah.
support. And I think it's funny because just being a listener as well of your podcast, I can see questions come up in some episodes and then be answered later on in other episodes. And I think it's beautiful that you kind of take all of us along that learning journey with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the important piece of like when we say we're having the conversations, it's like a never-ending conversation. Like we're not going to just figure it out and have it figured out. And I do want that to be very clear in the way that these episodes are. It's all about the conversation continuing and like knowing that we can say something one day and learn something new the next. And we can come back and change our mind on something or have new insights and realizations about something. And like that will be a part of this, especially like you think about motherhood and raising ever changing little people that are like constantly in new phases. Like, yes, we will continue to learn.
I'm going to rapid fire some questions from the community. On Instagram, you had posted and I had shared a question box on your stories to collect any questions that listeners in your community might have. So I'm just going to rapid fire some of those for you, Emily.
Ooh, I'm excited.
How do our children benefit from us caring for ourselves?
So I think this is like a huge conversation, and like pretty much every episode of the podcast touches on this in some way. But just to kind of boil it down, I think there's a few different ways that our kids benefit. Number one is that when we are caring for ourselves, we show up probably more like we want to show up. We have more capacity for their big emotions. We, just are more awake when we're getting enough sleep, like just all the different things, right? If we are taken care of, we can show up for others. And that's true. And so they benefit from that, right? But there's another layer to it that I love exploring. And that's that when we are caring for ourselves, our kids are seeing us caring for ourselves and they know then that they can care for themselves. They can prioritize their needs in whatever it is that they're doing. If they have friendships that they're navigating and it's not working for them, they can advocate for themselves, right? If they are going to get a job as an adult and there's like no work-life balance and they're like, okay, this isn't going to work, and they can make a decision that's right for them in that moment. If they go on to have a family, they can then continue to care for themselves even after they have kids, right? And so it's like there's so much to it that it's worth focusing on caring for ourselves, because I know that that's not necessarily just an easy like, whoop, I got it, I'm caring for myself, I'm good, because it's our needs are constantly changing. It's not just the basic needs. There's like pouring into yourself in a lot of other ways, like doing things that you care about outside of being a parent. Like that's a need that we have and like needs to be fulfilled. And we're caring for ourselves by fulfilling that need. It's something that is worth putting effort into. It's worth the effort to learn to love yourself in a way where caring for yourself is just what happens. And there might be planning that happens and, figuring it out, but that's just what feels good. It's something, again, not minimizing the challenges to get to a place where that's the norm, something that I'm like very, very much still working on, but it's worth working on.
Absolutely is. I love that you talk about the added layer, the second layer of modeling self love and caring for ourselves and that self compassion for our kids. And I'm curious for anybody who is still battling that, but I can do better and I can do more cleaning and I
Mhm.
can do more around the house. We can kind of like flip that scenario and look at it as what are we modeling to our kids when we're trying to be the perfect mom? Like we can see the benefits of caring for ourselves and what that's modeling to them. So let's also talk about what it looks like when they see you being the perfect mom or the image of what you're showing them at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people our age grew up with moms who didn't show any of the struggle. Not everyone, of course, but like that's, I think, part of what has perpetuated this need to be perfect is that if we didn't see somebody navigating imperfection as an adult, we just thought like you become an adult, have kids, and you're good at it, or you're supposed to be good at it, or whatever it is, right? And when we think about like what we want for our kids, I think that's something that I don't know that people stop to think about that as often as we probably should. Like, what is important? What do I want to like instill in my kids? And I don't know about you, but like for me, it's not that they have to be perfect to be like worthy of love and their own care and, all these things. Like, no, because they're not going to be perfect. And I always say that, like, our kids are not going to be perfect. Look around you at all the adults you know. Are any of them perfect? Are any of them close to perfect? What does that even mean, right? Like, our kids are not going to grow up to be perfect. It's not possible. And so being able to model for them that you're also not perfect and not trying to like pretend that you are because you're not. And you can only do so much to like achieve that image. And then I think sometimes we take it the extra layer of like hiding the imperfections from our kids. And, there's obviously things that they don't need to be exposed to. And that's kind of up to you to decide. But there is value in them seeing that like we're figuring it out. We're still growing up. We're still learning because they're going to hit however old you are right now and probably still be growing up and still learning. And there doesn't need to be any shame that comes with it. And if they just expect that, they expect that they'll always be learning and growing and messing up bad, right? Like then it's going to be easier for them to navigate that.
It's really beautiful. Next question. What advice do you have for mothers balancing work and motherhood?
My biggest piece of advice is just knowing that you cannot do it all. And like, that's not to say you can't be a good mom and work, but it's to say that like that can't look like doing it all. And this goes for any mom. This goes for any mom, no matter what your employment situation is like, no matter where you spend your time, who you spend your time with, if you're with the kids all day or not, you cannot do it all. It's just not realistic. And like, I really just want to make that clear. I'm not saying that of like, you shouldn't do it all. Like, you cannot.
Mhm.
You cannot be the one who is caring for your child 100% of the time and also working full time or working part time or not working at all, but taking care of yourself. Like it just doesn't work that way. Our presence doesn't work that way. What we
Work
can do with yeah, it's just like it's not
possible.
possible.
And
Yeah.
that's okay. There's nothing
Yeah.
against you or any of us. We're not designed to be able to do all of that. And I don't know
Yeah.
where along the way we became like under the impression that we need to, but it's definitely
Yeah.
not. So talking about it is so important.
Well, and like being able to, yeah, then like embrace that mindset of like, I can't do it all. So, like, why am I expecting myself to? And being able to reframe then any guilt that comes with not being able to do it all to be like, well, yeah, like,
Mhm.
of course I can't do it all. I am a
Okay.
human.
Yeah, love that. Next question. What are small ways that we can support mothers?
Okay, this is like one of those questions that I think there's a lot of ways that I could take it. But I think that the thing that I'm going to say is that if we can understand how different factors impact the motherhood experience for all of us and for different mothers as individuals, and really work to understand like the systems in place, the policies in place. We think about working moms and the policies that impact mothers, and we can learn about why the experience may be hard, harder than it needs to be, why it feels so hard. It's just a lot. It can make it easier to know how to support the moms in your life. And I don't know, just being more informed about like how then you navigate the world. Of course, like then there's other smaller things like literally being there for other moms, whether that's like, with a new baby, doing the things that are actually helpful, like showing up and doing the dishes, whatever it is, right? Or like literally just making those connections and being somebody to have the conversation with, because I think that's something that a lot of us are lacking in our lives when, I mean, it's hard to like make friends as
Mhm.
adults. Let's be real. And so I think just being somebody who is willing to listen and also willing to share can be massive in supporting other moms.
And how brave of you to share and to make this space for all of us to gain that awareness and learn that language to apply to our lives and advocate for ourselves and grow and learn.
I try.
Very well. You do so well. You're in the top 10% globally.
I know. I'm like so excited to be just getting to more moms and spreading this message. And I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? Is to be having the conversation and broadening who's having this conversation. So, like, woo.
I'm so proud of you for everything that you have done. Actually, this is the next question from the community. What do you love most about having your podcast?
Okay, so if you haven't noticed, I love talking. And like that sounds really, it's not just like I love hearing my own voice. I love connecting with other people and like having the back and forth and getting into it. Find me like chatting up some stranger at a party. Like I'm seriously all about connecting, getting to know people and understanding experiences and relationships and dynamics and different things like that. And this podcast has given me the opportunity to have conversations with so many people who, first of all, I just never would have known they existed, right? But also, like, you can't just like ask, well, you can, but you don't just ask someone random to like sit down and have a conversation with you on this topic that they're an expert on in normal life. But when you have a podcast, you get to do those things. And so, like, just having these really incredible conversations with people who know so much about these different things that I'm interested in or have so much life experience to share, it's like, okay, this is what it's all about. This is like my dream to be able to do this, and I'm doing it.
Do you have anything new or exciting coming up for listeners or the community that they can look out for?
Well, I will say there are some really exciting episodes coming on the podcast. I think the next 100 episodes are going to be even better than the first. And so I'll say, like, there's a lot of different places. You know, we just rebranded the podcast a little bit and launched all of that. And so there's going to be just some growth and development that come along with that. And so I'm really excited about that. There's also just some really exciting, like, collaborative projects in the works for the future that really just kind of push this mission of having honest conversations with moms and like making the world a better place for moms through this like type of community learning and just understanding like our experiences. So I don't know, there's a lot to keep an eye on, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Yes, so make sure you subscribe and you don't miss out on a single thing. I want to thank you on behalf of all of our listeners, your listeners, for being vulnerable and giving us this special piece of you, for dedicating all that you have done in these 100 episodes and the next 100 and everything that is to come after that.
Bree, thank you so much for being here and doing this with me and like celebrating with me. It's like a little late night activity that we got to do. And I'm really happy that you are here and feel really grateful to get to like share in this different way.
The honor was all mine.
So there's just one last thing to say. You are worthy, Mama.